Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Between the Sharks. This is kind of a 1927 Ford Touring hot rod build reboot kind of thing. When I got started on it, I was super ambitious and really energetic this fall. However, two things happened. One, the cowl nearly kicked my butt. It was not only damaged the way that we knew it was damaged, it was tweaked in every direction. And that took a lot longer and a lot more sorting out than I think I anticipated. While I dealt with that, winter crept in, the weather got crappier, and projects I could take outside, or I could take the 54 that lived where I'm standing now outside to get some room to work. It just became less of an option, you know? If you have a car that you've worked on a ton, it's kind of like your girlfriend. You can't leave them out in the cold while you pay more attention to different things. So that inspired a garage extension project, which I, go back a couple episodes. That's what that's all about. But now it's raining, so forgive the noise. But the 54 is currently right behind that wall in the extended part of the garage. It got a bath. It was nice and dry, and now we can work in this place. Not only with enough room to, move, I'm going to be less likely to damage that car while we do it. As exhausting as the garage expansion project was, it has afforded us all of this space for activities. So we still have a ton of work to do on this body. It still resembles a colander more than it resembles a Model T. Now, our goals for how we do this work are still the same. I am going to try to preserve as much of the 100-year-old history of this car as I can, which means, certain parts of the texture and, things I don't want to erase, that a restoration would remove evidence of. And there's something about the way this body looks that kind of speaks to me. So the cowl at this point is still very Swiss cheesy. The metalwork will happen. I'm not going to leave this the way it is. But for now, we've gotten it straight and untweaked enough that if you are watching this because you are building a 2627, we kind of have it to where yours probably started. And it took forever. And it was not that much fun. Less like that. So let's get after it. So if you feel like you've been on this journey before, trust me, me too. So first things first, I've got this door mounted on hinges. It's not, let's see, I don't know if you can see. Basically the door is not actually bolted on, it's just sleeved on the hinge and using that as a spacer. Close the door. Obviously that's all still hammered, but the original body line where the door should line up is still there. So I'm going to close the door. This is not great, but that could be an artifact of this just being hammered so many times. This I can fix later, but generally speaking, the sweep of the door is doing what I need it to. It's tucking into this patch, which I had a little remnant of the original steel to kind of place that. And the door is lining up here, generally speaking, where it should be. We'll adjust all that as we go, but I think this is enough to get us close. I need to get the door to come out like that a little more, but we'll tack weld this in place, then we'll line up that next piece and we'll move on. All right, this door is tacked in, so it is now holding a cowl to the door for this whatever filler piece is. A couple quick things. I apologize for the rain. I hope you can hear me anyway. A few quick things here. One, got this at Harbor Freight. I don't know what it was, but it was reasonably cheap. I wouldn't use it to hold a ton of weight, but it is super helpful for lining up something like this. Hold the door, where I wanted it to be. Now, everything in here is pretty floppy still. So the process is going to be, once these are all tacked in and relatively solid, which it will be when it's a circle, I can go in and add bracing that will hold everything in this orientation. So when I cut the door loose, these two pieces will be fixed in such a way that the door will swing back and this is where it's going to land. Once again, as I said 282 years ago when I started this process, when I'm working on something like this is the line I'm after, this upper line, because there's going to be a lot going on down below. If this doesn't flow, it's going to be obvious from every angle. If I need to hide any weirdness, I'd rather hide it at the bottom. All right, so let's take a second to review doors here. I know that I'm trying to keep this texture and all that, but my rear doors, the only doors that this body came with, were in really bad shape. Not only do they have a ton of texture, the repairs, that is just a piece of bent galvanized sheet metal. It's not the right shape at all to fit in the door. You can see that this body line that exists, well, doesn't exist, is kind of the thing. That should carry all the way around the door. These are relatively inexpensive to get, about 70 bucks from somebody on eBay or a swap meet, because this portion of the car can be used for the Roadster pickup, whatever. So people traditionally have been cutting touring cars into buckets and Roadsters for eternity. I don't know why. I think this is super neat. That said, these things end up as wall hangers and are available. The amount of work and effort it would take to replace this galvanized and the bead roll and the whole, you know what I mean? It's a lot of work. So, for roughly, this isn't perfect. This still needs work, but we're in a lot better shape. And when we're really, really getting down to it, having this body line is a big deal. We're gonna knock this door out. Guys, save your hinges. These are roughly $45 each. You have to buy them in a set of 4. So unless you have sets of, 160 bucks laying around, you don't want to cut these. Gang, a little bit of real talk here. These can be a bit of a bear, but they're also very rare and very expensive. So don't do this, man. Just don't do this. I have a collection of hinge plates where somebody has just gone in with a grinder and cut off the little loops that hold the hinge pins. Don't be lazy. Let's discuss. Here is your hinge pin getter outer kit. 1, lubrication, whichever one you want. That's a WD-40 top, which is not really lubrication, but whatever, it works. On a PB Blaster can. We will start here. Apply liberally. Any oil that you want. Next, I keep a little fire on hand. These are not only affordable, they're also very fun. A punch or two, preferably one that is the size of the hinge pin or slightly smaller. A wanging device. This one happens to be a 24-ounce wanging device, but a claw hammer, a roofing hammer, a 2x4, anything is better than just starting with a grinder. Not uncommon. It's been in there for 100 years and 100 coats of paint. So we have rust, we have all sorts of things. Now, another thing, if you fellas are thinking ahead, is this door may be bound up because of the welds. So if I can't get them to move, I will loosen this and then we can kind of shake it all free. Just thought I'd give it a whirl and see if it wanted to come loose. That somewhere where I'll never find it again. All right. As a fella can see, these are bound up. Things are bending a lot more than these are moving. Just means we're in for a little bit of a fight. Again, it's not that big a deal. Just use a little patience and a big hammer. That came loose in all the wrong places. Well, wasn't like we weren't gonna have to fix it anyway. Interesting. There's evidence this door has come out, actually. We're missing 2 of the 4 screws that hold the hinge on the inside, which is strange, actually. It's actually the case. Maybe I'll just try to pop the door off and I can do this on the bench. I'm so curious to know. All right, fellas, the mysteries on this car continue. So the hinges of the door had at least clearly been removed previously. It was missing hardware on the car side. It only had one machine screw in each hinge. In addition, that machine screw was held in with a hex nut, not the square nut that would have come from the factory. What does that mean? I don't know. But I'm still working on ciphering out exactly how Model T hinges work because I don't entirely remember. What I mean by that is there are two kinds of hinges. There are this size, and then I've lost it already. Great Scott. And we're back. So I was hoping this door was going to be a clue, a piece of forensic evidence of original Model T Ford that told me a missing piece of information. It's not going to, or maybe it is, and I don't know how to read the tea leaves. So maybe you guys can help me out. Here's what I know. There are at least two different lengths of hinges. Here are half hinges. Got this guy, and I've got this guy. The set that Max sells for the front door seems to come with one set of long hinges and one set of short hinges. So it's my understanding / assumption that if you line up the pins so that the door doesn't bind, it would suggest that the little hinge goes on top and the body taper that curves down has the longer hinge to make this hinge pin line and this hinge pin line actually line up in the same plane despite the body's curvature. I would have thought that that would have existed on the back as well. Because, as you can see, the door profile does have some curve to it. But, you know, maybe the rear hinges are supposed to be identical because the curve is not that much. Maybe at some point in the last 100 years, somebody swapped some hinges. Crap. Well, for now, I've just got to get these hinges loose, like not even this way loose because they're very bound up, but off of the door because they're going to function as our door spacers for our more new door. See you in a minute. All right, gang. I'm going to try to show you the method I have been slowly developing to remove these very tired and very rusted in screws. I've got like 248 doors. A lot of the hinges have been cut off. And this has sort of been my end result with this tactic. So what I've been doing, and maybe I can replicate this, is drilling out the center of the screw, opening it up just a fuzz, close to the actual diameter of the screws, like basically trying to take most of that shank out. And then going in there with this guy, and that seems to be like breaking the head off the screws. So let me see if I can make it work on camera, and then you guys can take this method to the bank and, you know, use it on your own projects there. Step one, mighty sharp, relatively new drill bit. Not necessarily a good one. I mean, I think it's straight off the shelf at Northern Tool. We're through that one. Obviously I should throw some cutting oil on there, but for demonstration purposes we're just going to move on through. Slightly larger. Big step drill bit. This is Irwin, which means it's probably straight off the shelf at Home Depot. Or maybe that's Lowe's, I don't know. All right, not bad. that is my little how-to on removing these hinges, because remember, the piece in here is indeed threaded, and I think that's actually salvageable. We're not going to be using this door, but I don't think I boogered up the threads too bad. And I can get the hinge out, and then you should be able to knock the rest of the bolt out and run a tap through it if you need to. Anyway, hope that yours are in better shape than mine, but if they're not, that's a method. Yep. Yeah. So, again, this is just more of an artifact of, at some point, this car was cut in half for some reason, or was assembled out of two cars, meaning somebody made a roadster out of the front half here, and then someone returned it to a touring body. The subframe was also cut here. That's why nothing really fit. So, again, you know, I didn't know that from the one picture I saw on eBay when I bought the car, but that's just the way it goes. Little progress check. We're getting sort of cattywampus here. Let's see if you guys can eyeball. So we're tucked in here. We're pooched out here. This body line is actually looking pretty good. So basically everything's just tacked in. All right, so this side is kind of tacked together, but we're obviously not super happy yet, meaning this probably needs to swing in, and this probably needs to pull out, and we'll have to adjust these details as we go. All right, so if you're dealing with something as hammered as this, and you get a little lost, and you're not sure as you tweak things and you push and pull, just step back, eyeball it. So originally, all of these sheet metal panels were held in by these little braces. We're going to double those up with box steel, and we're going to tie those into a steel frame, subframe thing, right? And that, like right now, this is clamped on right here, but this type of flex will all be locked in when it's welded to this thing. This thing will be that thing will be bolted to that thing, and you know, Bob's your uncle. All right, gang, we are indeed starting to look like something. This door is back on, thus making this side complete. Now, the next problem to solve, unfortunately, requires steel, and I am all out, so I will go shopping first thing. All right, so back in the way back when, these pieces of stamped steel were held in place by the skin of the body just wrapping around it. It's still sort of in place up here, but you can see over time and wiggling and whatever else, it's come loose. Same thing with this piece back here that folds around the skin just in front of the passenger or the driver's side rear door. This side over here had the same thing. Basically, that was all that held the skin onto the structure. And then these whoop-de-doos were indeed attached to the subframe from the factory, which in my case, it was rotten, cut up, and put back together wrong. So, now, this should actually be like that. So the fact that this is, you know, that loose is a problem. So we need to address all of that. We'll attach the skin here, probably do some spot welds in here, and then we may or may not need to double up with a piece of bent box steel tubing. The strongest parts of this car are these braces, the skins of the doors, the way they're like a boxed shape. That's what gives the car the profile on the exterior, the curve this away and the curve this away. All right, gang, so our car is back to being somewhat more car-shaped. It is correcter on the top than it is on the bottom. Two reasons for that. One, we can actually see the correct line for the top being the edge of the doors and the panel between the doors, and then the whole what you do in the back. And the bottom half is, you know, rotten off. So at this point, it's still kind of wobbly. If I could rack the entire car like so, by, you know, basically pushing one side forward or back. And I can also kind of lean the car so that it does this sort of a number. We've got to make that go away, and we have to make our shape correct while we make it go away, and then we will permanently fix it to a subframe and make it stay that way. So I went out and bought electrical conduit. Yeah. So first things first, this is braced in all directions, but now I've got to deal with this floppiness back here. A lot of this I got to do by eyeball because, frankly, even if we had a pretty good diagram of what these dimensions are, the exact point the measurement was taken from on an original body is, you know, it's going to be a little room for interpretation. Take your engineer hat off and, you know, put on your, like, barely evolved monkey hat, and you're like, yeah, does it look right? Sure, great, that's what we're gonna do. And for me, I have chosen electrical conduit. It is not ideal. Welding through galvanized is no fun, but so is welding through rust is also not fun. And it was cheap. And right now it is 2022. If future people are watching this, material is expensive. And I might be able to repurpose this. That said, there are a couple of things I consider when I do something like this, and one of them is making sure I don't weld a thing where I'm going to need to weld another thing. Translation, don't get in your own way. The purpose of this is temporary bracing so that we can build up from the actual subframe. So right now, while it's a little inconvenient to have this on the top, it's kind of my best bet. One of the things I try to do when I'm doing, this type of bracing on something this wobbly is to make sure that these are straight lines. And by straight lines, I mean I've lined the conduit up at a corner point on both sides. So in theory, this distance is whatever it is now, but I can generally get an idea of what square is, from this edge to the point where it actually lines up. Not square. It's not a surprise, but we can shift it a little bit by moving this back and forth now, because it is at least indeed tied together. Square is a relative term on something like this. We're just going to make sure it's not super cattywampus. But we're going to continue this process along the top edge all the way down, and I'll see you in a minute. All right, gang, we're tacked in up here, we're tacked in back here. There's the tiniest bit of structure there, and there's, this back end is actually okay. But we still got a lot of wiggly going on. Like, we can rack it a little bit like this. If I grab the front end of it, we can start to twist it. Basically, this is the equivalent of a rusty old tin can. It's fine, we're gonna fix it. So first things first, we are going to try to center this thing so that we can start building a subframe. What I have here is a super janky frame table, meaning the cheapest piece of OSB I can afford with a straight line marked in chalk down the center of the 4x8 sheet. All right, gang, so let's have a little talk about subframes. This is the one that I took out from this car. I cut it out of the body. This is the passenger side, that's the front. That's the back. As you can see, it is quite rotten. In addition to being quite rotten, it is not straight in this direction, which it should be. A Model T subframe is pretty much flat, and the Model A frame that we're going to put it on is pretty much flat. That said, if you're doing something a little fancier or channeling a car or whatever, there are other ways to do it that I'm not going to cover. Obviously, if you're watching this, you found Iron Trap Garage. They do super great work, and you know, he has made, Matt has made some subframes that fit 32 chassis and whatever else, and he'll fit his subframe to the actual car frame. In my particular case, I don't really care about that. I need my subframe to match the body, and sort of like Henry Ford did on the assembly line, I want to be able to pick that body up with no roof on it and have it be stable enough that I can just plop it down on a Model A chassis, and I will build whatever mounts I need to attach the subframe to the chassis. The subframe, it's tricky because I didn't really do that on camera, but basically I mimicked this curve, did it on one side, flipped that over, mirrored it, got the other side, used the original cross members. Basically, I took a measurement from the front to where the cross member landed, the width off the original subframe, and sort of applied it to this thing. So what I'm trying to show you is how we're going to hit the critical measurements. Right now, I've centered the subframe, and then we are going to continue to center the body from front to back on that subframe. We have our center line marked. We are screwed in so that our cross members that are holding everything kind of oriented are centered and are relatively square to our front edge. This is a hot rod, not an Indy car, so you know what I mean. So the next step is to weld in. I'm going to reuse the original front brackets. They go to the firewall. The next step is going to be the back of the cowl to the subframe, which is this piece here. The next step is the spot behind the door. The next step is the spot in front of the rear door, so on and so forth. And on every step, we're going to make sure that piece is centered on our subframe and build a bracket to make that work. We've been plugging away. We are in better shape than we were. I want to bring you in and show you where we are. Nothing is to be proud of, but it's important, I guess, for anyone that's trying to figure out how to do this. Definitely can't say this is the best way to do it, but it's interesting. The last Model T I did was a Roadster pickup, and it was strangely more manageable because the body is really only from here to here. So there's not a whole lot to, you know, so basically it's a lot less body to try to kind of straighten up. Now, this is only double that, but it's a little harder than just trying to do two of the same thing because you're trying to keep everything in a happy, straight line going, you know, centered and all of that stuff. So right now, cowl's tacked here. That brace has been on there forever. I now have these two ugly brackets mounting the cowl to the subframe. The original cross member is welded in. Now granted, I said this before, but those are just 1.5 by 1.5 square tube that I'm using to substitute for the more detailed stamped rotten subrail. So I've actually recycled some of the very, very poorly bent fence hardware here and here. but that's at least keeping this plane somewhat straight. I tack welded a unistrut bolt and tack welded these pieces to it. Now this also used to attach to the subframe, and this used to attach to the subframe. So what this is doing for me really is basically I've got the car into the shape that I need it to be in, both using kind of a general measurement from center and using my eyeballs to make sure this line is right and this profile is right, because as you push and pull these, you know, you change this relationship. This brings me to yet another point. I actually had to stop and go do some research on Model T bodies because there's this gap. And if I pooched, because there's nothing attached to anything, I could pooch this panel out and make it fit, but it became a very weird profile, almost like it was twisted out. It definitely didn't look right. So after some research, the Henry Ford doors, even there's a famous car, Voodoo Doll, which is a famous touring car, competed for some Riddler, Joker, Batman, I don't know, some award that I don't really care about. But even that car, they hadn't gone to the point where they modified the door to fit the car better. So it was pretty stock looking, which had a tiny gap here, which is interesting. I have to get the rest of this body attached to the subframe, and I have gotten ahead of myself in putting this together because I never trimmed the backs of these rails off. So now I need to do it with the body here and in my way. But these mounts, which are on the back side of the passenger doors, need to be done. And then the rear part of the body needs to be mounted to a cross piece that will facsimilate essentially that very rusty piece that would go between the two back parts of the subrail. We're attached up to where the back of the front seat is, but if I drag this, see what I'm saying? It's pretty intense, right? This is the kind of thing you're gonna deal with if you buy parts of these cars, you know, if you just buy sections of them at swap meets and stuff. You can put it together. Hopefully if you go that route, you're buying better parts than what I have here. But, you know, if not, come on, they're 100 years old. Still cool, make it work. And for those of you out there that are doing this for the first time or just checking it out, remember, if you're gonna channel the car before you remove it from the original subframe, brace it in every which direction so that you don't have to go through this process. That's enough jibber jabber. Let's get this back part done. This is by far the worst body I've ever worked on, so I am generally lining things up from my center point, but there is nothing to say that this car has not been hit, dropped, moved, broken, or otherwise bubbled up in the past to say that these two sides are in any way symmetrical, right? Because for the most part, nothing on this car has been. We're gonna get into this in a minute, but I just thought I'd show you to exemplify. Factory brace bolts through right here, and then this part that I cut was part of the back subrail. We come over to this side. This thing is bent into an entirely different profile. It still kind of lines up, but you know, if you look in here, there's also crumply metal and evidence that something, you know, fell or dropped or got bent. So the short version of that is that one is now longer than this one because this one is now bent in ways it shouldn't be. And I'm using that to illustrate the problem that's been, you know, we've been tracking down on every one of these things. This one, these two actually look okay, but how's that for a really, really long-winded explanation of why I'm not exactly trying to come off center, like that's not my only priority here. We're doing a lot of eyeballing. So that said, before I move this thing around too much, let's go ahead and find some way to just tack these to the subframe so that we can continue on and figure out this back part, which I really don't want to do. minimally stuck together to keep this where I want it to function long enough to make it better. Let's get the other side, move on. Kind of painted myself into a corner slash chicken or the egged myself. Meaning I had the subframe kind of laid out with some general basic measurements, trying to make it relatively square to itself, just so that there were no major discrepancies right to left. But the details, especially on this back part, I kind of needed the body here and on it to sort out exactly how that was gonna work. But the problem is now that the body's on it, it's harder to work on. All right, here goes nothing. I'm gonna pull these screws. It's not really a point of no return. It's more of like a point of we get to do it all over again if this doesn't work out the way I want. Also interesting. All right, moment of truth. This is me stalling again. I feel like I'm forgetting something that's gonna cause a catastrophe. What? That's just my general mental state. Well, I'll do those forever. All right, let's, Huh. Did you see that whole thing move together? I mean, you remember how it was? Like that. All right, gang, trying to tie the room together, AKA the hind end of this thing, and I'm just gonna simplify it. Basically, I've come off a point I could measure, part of the bracing on the door here, just pulled it back the same distance, 15 and whatever 5/8, which gets me close to where this piece would have attached to the original subframe, and yeah, we'll put that in and just make the rest work. Try not to weld the clamp there. Come on, buddy. Come on. All right, so we've got one final thing to do. Final thing. Yeah, no. Just got to center this section here on the piece we just welded in. So let's go ahead and mark center really quick. Figure out a way to just get her all tacked in and stop back and look and like, stop back and dudes, you know what I'm saying? All right, fellers. Dog approves. Nowhere near done. In fact, if anything, we've really just achieved the starting point of most projects, meaning that the car body has a ton of rust and things we need to deal with, but it's at least, that's the entire table moving. So I've got to be pretty happy with that. All right, fellas, that's going to about do it. But at this point, the car, we're moving the whole table here. So what I'm saying is the car is solid enough that we can continue the work, making fancier braces to our newly built subframe, doing our patch panels. Basically, we're closer to a car body than we have ever been. And I know it doesn't look like much, and this is kind of like a bad starting point for most projects, but it has taken a long time to get here. So, I mean, honestly, originally I thought I was gonna be able to take this body, put it on the frame, and kind of run it like a jalopy or whatever. And then of course this door didn't fit by an inch, which led me to realize that the original subframe had been cut, spliced back together and was bent, and it was all wrong. So we had to blow the entire car apart. We found like the cowl was busted, twisted, bent in every which way. That took weeks of spare time. Thank you for anyone that actually followed that trajectory of videos, because honestly, I never thought I was gonna make 28 videos on a cowl. But anyway, here we are. We have plenty of work to do going forward, but at least we are indeed moving forward. At least we can just make it better from here. So thank you guys so much for following along. If you subscribed because of this car, I really appreciate that. This is going to be, or hot rods are going to be, the focus of this channel. That's really what I set out to do. But if you follow me through that garage journey, I really appreciate that too, because the 54 Chevy is tucked just beyond that wall, safe from the dust and the sparks and everything else, and I have room to work in here. So that was painful to do on the wallet and my body, but I am already enjoying working on this a lot more because, well, I can get around it. It's a big deal. So if you're into this type of thing, consider subscribing. It definitely helps the channel out. If it's not your bag, hey man, it's not your bag, that's fine too. We will be back, maybe doing some patch panels and finishing up our subframe. And for those of you that like actually have been following along, I have been hinting at sort of another car that's gonna show up, and you know, YouTube time and real time are two totally different things, but in real time, I'm renting a truck and trailer tomorrow to go pick it up, and it will be in the new annex, but we'll do a walk around as soon as we get there. Think custom. So we got a hot rod. I think we're gonna do a custom too. Anyway, thanks for watching Between the Sharks. Good luck on your projects out there. We will see you next time. You can see it. Looks like a thing.